How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Joining us on today's show is Jim Derry. Jim is the CEO of Field Fastener. Back in 1990, Jim and his brother Bill Derry purchased this company from its founder, a guy named Dick Field, and we're going to learn more about this. In the years since then, Field Fastener has grown. It's a family business. It's grown into a company that serves companies all over the country. They've got over 250 employees, and they've got an amazing culture, which is why we've got Jim here on Culture Architects. The key to their success has always been their world-class culture. And at the heart of that company culture are their 30, as they call them, fieldamentals. And that makes Jim a real culture architect. So Jim, welcome to the Culture Architects podcast. Glad to have you with us.
Oh gosh, David, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Jim, I want to go back to some history here for our audience. So Field Fastener, first of all, explain to people what Field Fastener does. Let's start there.
Yeah. So we really provide a vendor managed inventory system for our largest customers, whereby we stock material, fasteners and parts and into bins on our customers' manufacturing floor. So basically our customers reach into a bin, grab a bolt out of it and stick it in a hole, and we make sure that bin never runs out. So a customer, they don't place orders, they don't receive it, they don't inspect it. They just consume the product in these bins, and we manage the inventory at the point of consumption for our customers. So in the simplest sense, that's what we do. And our customers build things like school buses and elevators and train cars and drinking fountains. And so our customers build stuff that people use on a daily basis.
Got it. So let's go back to the history. Back in 1990, was it that you and your brother bought the company? Yep. So what were you doing before? Like, were you and your brother in the industry and you're familiar with it? Like, how did you come to, like, who buys a fastener company?
Yeah. Nobody ever aspires to be a fastener guy.
You didn't grow up saying, if I could get into fasteners, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. So actually, my brother Bill worked in the fastener industry. If you go back long enough, back in the 90s, actually Rockford, Illinois, our hometown, was the fastener manufacturing capital of the world. There were a lot of companies that made fasteners in Rockford. And Bill got into that job, that industry right out of college. And he actually worked for Dick Field at a different company years and years ago. I was selling computers in Minneapolis, my first job out of college. I've been doing that for 7 years. And Bill had this idea to buy a company, buy this little business. There were 12 people and the revenue was $800,000 a year. We would buy it together, and I would move back to Rockford to run it, and he would be an investor. So I don't know. I was 29. Honestly, I didn't know enough from a bolt, but it seemed like a good idea. And we did it. So we ended up buying the business. I moved my family back, and we kind of just started trying to build this little company. And a couple years into it, Bill joined the business. And really, we kind of look back and just chuckle because, it was a dumpy building. And the business last year was 200 times bigger than it was when we bought it. So
wow, 200 times.
It really is. It's been, honestly, the American dream. I mean, we look back and it's been super fun. Bill has 2 sons in the business. I have 2 sons in the business. And now working with our kids is great. We've done all the work to kind of keep the business in our family with the, trust and all that kind of stuff and shareholders agreements and all the kind of stuff you need to do to keep a business in a family. So we're really excited. We've had great success, but we know our best days are yet to come. And
that's cool.
It's been wonderful.
So going back to you and your brother buy this business. Bill at the time, as it sounds like, was just an investor for a couple of years while you're trying to get this business off the ground. Like, how did you know how to run a business? I mean, you're 29 years old. You've been selling computers. What do you know about running a business? How did you even start that?
I mean, I was a sales manager. So the thing that really what the business needed was someone to go out and sell, because there really wasn't anybody selling, and I was reasonably capable of doing that. That's what my career was. And I was a mechanical engineer in college, so I knew I could figure out the basics of fastening and nuts and bolts and kind of that kind of a thing. So really, we just kind of went in and I started calling on customers and running a business was something I just kind of figured out. So we just kind of just started, doing what you thought was the right thing to do. As we look back, we certainly didn't think about culture then. I mean, we didn't even know what it was, but as we reflect back, the culture was just what our family was. I mean, what we grew up, there were 7 kids in our family, and the business that we had now owned took on the culture of our family just because which is we did. We kind of work hard, have some fun, try to do the right thing with our people and our customers and suppliers. We just kind of tried to do the right thing, and stuff worked out.
So when did you, I have a similar experience in my own first business, which was a family business as well. And in those first years of my business, it was mostly my family. I often say when we had 15 employees, probably 10 of them were my family. And so in the early years, like you, I just thought, I wasn't thinking about culture. I was just trying to do what we do, and my family grew up in a certain way. So when did it dawn on you that, okay, yes, we've just been intuitively doing the things that we grew up doing. When did it dawn on you that maybe I should be more purposeful about this?
Yeah. I don't have a moment when that happened, but it was I would say for at least 15 years, the first 15 years, I never uttered the word culture. Never once. We never said that word. But somewhere in that 15 to 20 years in, we said, there is something a little bit unique about this business, right? There is something special about kind of the team and the culture. We started thinking we need to try to kind of define it and try to.
And how many people did you have at that point? Can you remember? What would be your guess?
I'm guessing there would be 30, something like that, somewhere in there. And then we started to get a little bit more serious about kind of a mission statement and some core values. And we started to get a little bit more serious about that. But I think the real kind of the point in time when we said, there is something special, we realized that we needed to hire a human resources professional that could hire people that fit this organization that we're kind of really enjoying working at. And Bill and I, when we get together and laugh about some of the mistakes we made, is it's usually the people we hired. We were pretty good at, I think we're pretty good at selling fasteners and but hiring folks we're just not good at to look into the soul. So I think one of the defining moments in this journey around culture was hiring a human resources professional that could really we established some core values that could look into the souls of people and say, these folks fit our core values. And that, I would say that was the turning point of kind of when it got serious. Okay, now we have a human resources professional that can help us hire the right folks. And I'd say from that point on, the intentionality of, your approach and your process around culture really started when we could feel like we were hiring people that fit. That their mom and dad taught them the things that we can't teach them, and now they could be a part of our organization.
It's interesting, again, when I compare that to my own experience in my first company. As I said, we were family business, and the turning point for me, I remember, was when we started to hire a lot of people who weren't in my family. Yeah. And I realized that they didn't necessarily grow up like I did. And so if I want them to operate in a certain kind of way, I have to actually teach them what I want. I can't just assume that they grew up that way. And so I started to teach the things that were important to us. Like you, I wasn't thinking about culture. I never used that word culture in those days. That was back in the 80s and early 90s. I was just thinking of it as standards. There's a standard for the way we do things around here. And I want people and anybody in my company to operate in a certain way. And I better teach them how I want. It was only years later that I look back and think, I guess that's what culture was. But I was just trying to make sure everybody was playing to the same standard if they weren't in my family and didn't grow up in the same way.
Yeah. We had another example of how we missed it. In early 2000s, we bought another company in Chicago. We wanted to be in the Chicago market. And we, never thought about culture. The owner was a nice guy, had a nice business, good location. So we bought the business and we thought, okay, a week later, then we'll all be on the same team. We'll work together. And their culture was bad. It was just so different than ours. I mean, it was super hierarchical. I mean, the owner, great guy, still works for us 20 some years later, but his style was just, he made all these decisions and everybody just did what he said. and the culture was so different. We actually could never. We tried for years to integrate it, and it just didn't. It just didn't fit. And ultimately, we closed the business down and moved it into Rockford, and because we tried for years to integrate the culture, and it just didn't. It didn't work, but we didn't think about, geez, what's their culture? Just that, so we missed it. So that's been a big change now as we've grown and had some acquisitions. That looking at culture is a big part of that piece.
Yeah, and we'll get into that even more. So in those early days, you're the president, and the very earliest days, Bill, your brother, is an investor, and then he comes in to the company. How did you guys divvy up, like, who's doing what? And because I know you alternated somewhat too, didn't you? Or at least switched at some point.
Yeah, we moved some things around. I think we're both really sales guys, so we always kind of had that. And then we kind of by design, we would have the leaders of the different functions kind of work for me for a while, and then they would work for Bill for a while, and it just kind of mixed it up. So we found that was good for us as we kind of had the areas of the business that we were kind of most focused on, but then the leaders got a chance to work for different people. Our management styles and leadership styles were slightly different. So we just kind of mixed it up. And I think despite our roles and titles over the years, no decisions were ever made because somebody had a bigger title or was higher up in the org chart. We really looked at this business as we're partners and the best idea wins. And that served us really, really well because, sometimes you have an idea, like it could be a really good idea, really terrible idea. And it's nice to have someone you can go like, hey, Bill, I don't know, this idea could be really good or really bad. And you can talk about that stuff openly and freely and just be vulnerable and just kind of kick stuff around. So the kind of shared responsibility to run the business was very effective for us for the first 30 years. And the fact we're brothers, I think, kind of helps too, because there's this implicit trust and respect, and we're very similar, but he has different characteristics and traits and strengths than I do. So those strengths kind of together, I think we were better together than apart.
Do you think it ever created confusion on the part of the organization in terms of, so who's the point person here? Who runs this thing?
It did for a while when so Bill was president for a while, a bunch of years, and then when he stepped down as president, I took over in 2014 as president. That was confusing because he was still there. He went to the meetings. He didn't retire. And it was confusing for a while. So, and it wasn't intentional, but he's just interested, and he's a passionate guy, and still involved in the business. So we had to fix that, and we created a structure that we called the senior leadership team. So it was Bill and I and Bill and Adam and our CFO, the four of us. So Bill's opinions and thoughts about what we should be doing was heard by the senior leadership team. And then we take that input and then use that as we saw fit to run the business. But it kind of gave him a voice but it didn't create confusion. And we did that same approach when I stepped down as president a year and a half ago, and Bill's son Adam took over. So that transition went way differently, and actually a lot better because we kind of learned from the first one. But this forum for now Bill and I as the primary owners of the business to weigh in on what we think ought to happen. But then Adam and Chris, the president and EVP, they run the business like Bill and I did for the first 30 years as kind of as partners, but we provide our input to them, and then they use it as they fit, but they see fit, and it keeps us out of kind of the day-to-day running of the business, and it minimizes confusion.
And how in that transition, I'm curious about, so for Adam and Chris, we could ask them this question, but I'm curious about what you think. Do you think they feel completely at ease making a decision that might not have been what you made? Yeah. With you having weighed, you and Bill have weighed in with your opinion, and theoretically they ought to now be free to say, all right, I got it, but I hear you, but I think we're going to go here. How comfortable do you think they are at that?
Very. I mean, that happens regularly. I mean, there's several issues that Bill and I weigh in, and they go, okay, that's great, but we feel we're going to do this, and so nice. Yeah, they have the latitude to do that. And, we have expectations. There's certain things where, we're going to weigh in on an acquisition or a large capital expenditure, those kinds of things. But if it's running the business, if we've given them the responsibility to run it, we got to let them do it. And quite frankly, they've done a really nice job. Last year was great. This year will be even better. So they've done a really nice job leading the business. So we got to let them do what they want to do. And partly for Bill and I, and our, he's 10 years older than I am, so he's backed off more than I am. But I'm not working as much as I was, and quite frankly, it's kind of nice to have a little bit more time to do some other things and know the business is thriving. So it's kind of, we got to let them do what we're paying them to do, and really, quite frankly, they're doing a great job at it.
Nice. So let's go back to you're building your culture, and you're beginning to see that culture is a differentiator for you. That there's some special sauce that originally was your family, and now is starting to get formalized a bit with your hiring the first HR professional and starting to codify some of the things that are important to you. When was the first, you made that one acquisition in Chicago that you said wasn't quite a good fit for your culture. What was the first acquisition you did after that? And what role did culture play in deciding, is this a good fit for us?
Yeah, it was 2014 was the acquisition of a company called HRS Logistics. They have a facility in Tyler, Texas, and a couple of facilities in Mexico. And it was shortly before that, excuse me, David, when we met, we had established in 2010 the goal to go from 20 million in revenue to 100 million in revenue. So we had this really aggressive, we're going to grow. And in that process, we realized that we were not, to get to this goal of 100 million in revenue, we were not going to do it out of a single building. I mean, that just wasn't going to, there was no way we would get where we needed to be. So we realized that we had to figure out, how do we replicate this culture that we really started to now kind of be more intentional about and more purposeful about. And quite frankly, it was the Vistage meeting that you went to in downtown Chicago. I'll never forget it. It took me over 2 hours to get there. I was in a really terrible traffic, kind of a grumpy mood, like, grumbles. And then it was like, oh my gosh. So the approach that you've outlined, and really defining it with the fundamentals, when I heard that message, was like, well, this is it. This is how we can take what we have in Rockford, Illinois, and replicate that wherever it needs to be. I mean, it was kind of like the light went off. So, well, now here's how we do it. Because before then, we just didn't have any sense of how we would ever just replicate this culture in some other facility. So that was the eye-opening moment for us and our organization, is this 8-step process, and specifically the definition of the culture was the part that made so much sense. We didn't know where it would be, and it was shortly after that we did the acquisition in Texas and said, okay, here we go. And you went down there. We went down there together. And
I remember you and I going to Tyler, Texas.
The timing of that was perfect, because it was, it was in the process of buying this business, and we must have been talking. We must have been talking to those folks when we first met. But so the timing of that was perfect.
And so, for our audience sake, Jim and I met each other in a Vistage group that I spoke to, that Jim was part of back in 2014 or so. And we created what we normally call fundamentals, but in Jim's case, we call them fieldamentals, just to take advantage of that field name. And so Jim and Field Fastener has been practicing these fieldamentals since about 2014 or 2015. So nearly 10 years now. And you've grown from, how many people did you have back in 2014, would you guess?
We probably had 80, 60.
Wow.
And the company was 40 million. And when we met it, it's over 160 now. So we're 4 times, the revenue is 4 times bigger now than it was when we got started.
And you've got over 250 people, right?
Yeah. Now there's over 300 today.
Wow.
We had 1 facility, and now there's 7 in the U.S., 2 in Mexico, and a sourcing office in Taiwan. So the footprint is significantly greater. And the complexity of the businesses, I mean, we do the same thing, we just do it on a much bigger scale. So I was thinking about, just having this conversation, like, we are really lucky we did this when we did it, because we could not have, there's no way we could have scaled the business the way we have without this cultural foundation. I mean, it really kind of good fortune, I guess, that we met at that Vistage meeting, but there's no way we could have grown the business the way we have and made the change we have if it wasn't for the fundamental culture and the kind of the foundation of everything everything we stand for.
So as you think about the impact of working on this, one of the things that I find many CEOs ask about is the financial impact. So, okay, we know, as you said, we got to be able to replicate what we've built from a culture standpoint. Otherwise, we can't grow the way we want to grow. So, how do you talk about or think about the financial impact of your culture? If somebody says, well, that's good HR stuff, that's all nice, but does that really make you any money? What's your point of view about that, Jim?
Well, there's a bunch of elements of this. I would say it affects every element. But one of the things that stands out, and it was a surprise, again, this company we bought in Texas, shortly after we bought them, their largest customer, they make rail cars, Trinity, and at the time we had a little piece of their business, but they had a bunch more that we didn't have. And they were kind of going to the marketplace to say, all right, we have 5 suppliers now. We're going to let everybody, compete for this, but it's going to go to one supplier. And so in this process, we started talking about the fundamentals. And long story short, at the end of this, that was an important factor for them to make the decision is the organization's culture. They saw us as being different because no one else they're talking to said anything about their organization's culture. And the thing that we were able to articulate is that these 30 behaviors, the field fundamentals, we teach, coach, and train that to everybody, whether they're in Longview, Texas, or Dallas, Texas, or Monclova, Mexico, or Monterrey, Mexico, wherever they are. So they really recognize that the value of an organization, a supplier's culture, was important. So we ended up winning a pretty significant piece of business because of our culture. And since that time, we start every presentation and every sales call talking about organizational culture. So it is, for us, a competitive advantage. And if we can get a company to recognize the importance of culture, we win. I mean, our competitors, many of them are way bigger than us and publicly traded companies and great, they're good organizations, but when it comes to culture, they don't stand a chance. And if we can make that a factor in the decision process, and if we get, the numbers say, if we get a prospect to come and visit us in Rockford, 75% of those people make a decision to have us be their supplier. So it's a competitive advantage. So the first answer to your question is it absolutely helps us grow the business. No question about it. The other thing that culture does is it helps us find and keep the best people. We know that because the turnover rates we have and actually the people costs that we have, and we have access to industry benchmark numbers. I mean, our people costs are less than some of our competitors because when there's less turnover, and we think we have the best ones. They work hard. They're good at what they do. So our labor costs are less because we have, we spend less time on, turning people over and, retraining folks. So we think we know our labor costs are less. So it's certainly an advantage there. And we would say that the whole orientation around the culture and driving improvement, that we know that those two things go together well. I mean, people love what they do. They're empowered. And so they are more aggressive in trying to find new and better ways to do what they need to do. So I think it helps us at the top line revenue numbers wise. And I think it helps control some of our largest costs as the organization. So I would say the investment we've made in culture is probably the single most important investment we've made, because it's the return. Be hard to exactly quantify it, but it's been significant. So it isn't the fluffy stuff. I mean, our culture hits the bottom line very, very, very clearly.
That's the end of the first part of my conversation with Jim Derry, CEO of Field Fastener. In the next episode, Jim and I are going to continue to unpack his culture building journey at Field Fastener, including how he won over the skeptics to his side, how his favorite fundamentals have the best stories around them, and what's next for their culture as the company continues to grow under new leadership. All that and more in the next episode, so stay tuned.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.